July 24th, 1944, near St. Lo, Normandy. The sun hadn't burned off the morning mist yet, but already Oberleutnant Karl-Heinz Stiegler stood above Battery 3, binoculars in hand, boots dry, eyes calm. Behind him, 4 camouflaged 88mm guns pointed west, invisible beneath the Norman hedgerows. He grinned. "Let them bomb the crossroads," he muttered, half to himself. "The sky belongs to them, but the ground is ours." He tapped a map folded along sweat-worn creases, range marks, fuel estimates, firing arcs. They'd buried the ammunition deep, dug escape trenches, mapped every inch. No American pilot would dare come low enough to see them. Above the canopy, a faint engine growled. Stiegler didn't look up. He should have. The hedgerows of Normandy were not just bushes. They were walls. 10 feet thick, 6 feet high, rooted in centuries of French soil and stubbornness. For Oberleutnant Stiegler, they were a gift from God. Inside them, his battery vanished. No aerial reconnaissance could penetrate their leafy maze. American pilots flew high, dropped blind, and hoped. But the Germans, they calculated. Each 88mm gun rested under woven netting, branches arranged with surgical care. Ammunition stacked in shadowed depressions. Fuse timers double-checked every hour. When Stiegler's boots tapped through the camouflaged walkways, his men stood straighter. "Gentlemen," he said, lifting his canteen, "today they will fire, and they will not know what hit them." He believed it. Every word. 3 years on the Eastern Front had taught him respect for chaos. Here, in France, he believed he had left that chaos behind. The roads around St. Lo were clogged with American armor, slow, predictable, vulnerable. Their columns moved like parades, not armies. "We hold the flank," said Hauptfeld Wabel Bremer, his senior NCO. "They'll drive straight through the center, and when they do..." He made the motion of turning a key, twisting the whole front open like a tin. Stiegler smiled. Their battery was the hinge. Each gun had a name: Gretel, Siegfried, Dieter, Elsa. Gretel faced the hedgerow gap that opened west toward Le Mesnil. Dieter covered the sunken road the Americans would try next. The air smelled of oil and damp hay. Somewhere deeper in the field, cows mooed without urgency. A tractor burned quietly behind the lines, wreckage from an airstrike 3 days before. But that was high-altitude bombing, imprecise, inhuman. What Stiegler trusted was precision. He paced the firing line, stopping at each crew. "Elevation, 152, he said. "Wind, south by 4. Fuse delay, half second." No errors, no doubt. The mathematics of death obeyed him. One of the younger gunners, barely shaving age, whispered, "Are they afraid of us, Herr Oberleutnant?" Stiegler looked at him. "No," he said, "but they will be." From the radio tent, a crackled update arrived. New Sherman movement outside Pont Hébert. Confirmed by spotters. 25 tanks. No air cover. Bremer handed him a map, one he'd redrawn by hand that morning. Pencil lines marked every hedgerow, every rise and dip in the earth. Every range from their position. The American armor would enter the field of fire in exactly 16 minutes. Stiegler took a long sip from his canteen. Lukewarm water, tasted of aluminum. The field was quiet. So quiet, he could hear Bremer lighting a cigarette 2 positions away. There was no tension in his spine, no sweat on his brow. For the first time in months, he felt something like peace, a rare stillness before the work of war. It was then, just before the first American tank rolled into view, that a single black speck flickered low on the horizon. So low, it kissed the trees. Too fast for a reconnaissance plane. Too deliberate for a straggler. But Stiegler didn't notice. He was looking at his map. And the line he'd drawn across it, the line where the Americans would die, was about to be erased. A click of static broke the silence. The radio operator slapped his headset, frowned, and checked the wires. "I'm getting interference," he muttered. "Could be Allied jamming again." Stiegler didn't look up. He was watching the horizon through his rangefinder, tracking the first American tank, Sherman M4, just as expected. Moving slow, turret scanning. Behind it, another, and another. "Interference is normal," he said, distracted. "Use the backup channel if it continues." The operator nodded, but the crackling stayed, like something chewing on the airwaves. At Battery 2, Gefreiter Menzel paused mid-sentence. He was pointing at the sky, low to the north. "I saw something," he said. "Just now. A shadow moved. Too fast." His crew chuckled. "Birds," one said, "or one of ours on patrol." Menzel didn't laugh. It wasn't flying like recon. It was hunting. Word of the moment passed quietly from gun crew to gun crew. A mutter here, a glance there, but no one raised an alarm. Stiegler's focus remained on the tanks. 3 minutes, he said, checking his stopwatch. "Prepare to fire." Bremer jogged the line, shouting coordinates. Voices sharpened, gloves tightened, goggles pulled down. But behind the firing line, 2 supply men stood frozen. They were sniffing the air. "You smell that?" one asked. The other nodded slowly. It wasn't the usual gunpowder and oil. This was sharper, burned fuel, hot metal, fresh. Somewhere out there, something had flown dangerously low, close enough to leave a scent. They said nothing, just looked toward the trees, waiting. Far, too quiet now. The first salvo never came. Stiegler's thumb hovered over the stopwatch. 16 minutes had passed. No order to fire. He frowned. Bremer returned from the flank, face tight. "Command isn't responding," he said. "I've tried both frequencies." Stiegler tapped the map again. They should have called in artillery support by now. This is the window. Bremer said nothing. He lit another cigarette, hand shaking slightly. 2 minutes later, the forward observer at Point Red signaled in code, "Column halted, dispersing, no air cover seen." Stiegler exhaled, confused. Why would they stop? He glanced at the sky, clear, blue, open. No American aircraft. But something inside him twitched. From deep in the trees, a faint grumble rose. Not thunder, not shells. An engine, close, steady, unnatural. He looked toward the tree line. Nothing. Then one of the horses tethered behind Battery 3 reared violently, eyes rolling, mouth frothing. The handler tried to calm it, but the animal broke its rope and bolted into the brush. Others followed, panicked. "Something's wrong," Bremer muttered. A flicker, movement behind the orchard. Then the ground itself shuddered. Not from a shell, not an explosion. Something heavy passed close, just out of sight, so low it stirred the dirt. A private near the rear position dropped his crate of shells. "Did you feel that?" he cried. "Something flew past." Stiegler shouted for silence. He raised his field glasses, scanning the hedgerows. Still nothing. But now, even the birds had gone quiet. Another wave of static burst through the radio, louder this time. The operator ripped off his headset. "Too much interference. It's not jamming," he said. "It's, something else." Stiegler clenched his jaw. He turned toward the west, stepping beyond the camouflage netting. And for a moment, Just a moment. He saw it. A blur of gray and olive, a nose cone streaked with soot, a cockpit glinting like glass over a bonfire. It passed over the treetops sideways, banking, no higher than a farmhouse roof. His heart stalled. That was no recon plane. It was a P-47, alone. And it was turning around. It didn't come from above. It came from beside them, roaring, snarling, trailing fire. The Republic P-47. Thunderbolt tore through the hedgerows like a knife through lace. Its engine screamed like it was angry at the earth. Dust exploded from the tree line as it banked, nose down, wings level with the dirt. Stiegler stood frozen. No German aircraft ever flew like that. No American plane was supposed to. That low? That close? Impossible. The first pass happened before anyone could shout. The Thunderbolt opened fire. Its 850 caliber machine guns lit the air with streaks of fire and tungsten. The line of bullets chewed through Battery 2, tearing men, sandbags, crates, and metal into vapor. Gretel exploded. Not from a direct hit, but from the concussion of rounds igniting the shells beside her. Stiegler fell backward. He watched her gun shield fly like a dinner plate into the hedgerow. One of the gunners screamed, a single sharp note, then silence. The P-47 disappeared again. Gone behind the orchard. Seconds later, back again. Lower. Faster. Intentional. Dieter's crew had barely scattered when the next burst came. Flames engulfed the ammo pit. The ground trembled like a quake. Shrapnel sliced through leaves, branches, men. Stiegler crawled toward the command tent, shouting orders no one could hear. But the plane could hear everything. And it didn't care. The trees were on fire now. Not from shells. From the muzzle bursts of a plane flying below the branches. The Thunderbolt roared past again, its belly skimming the grass. Bullets raked the command tent, splitting canvas and steel poles in a blink. A radio console sparked, then burst. The operator inside didn't even have time to stand. Stiegler lay face down in the mud. His ears rang. His fingers clawed at earth slick with oil and blood. Every breath filled with smoke. He lifted his head, just enough to see Elsa's barrel twisted and burning. Ammunition popped inside like firecrackers. Her crew, gone. To his left, Bremer staggered from the supply trench, his coat shredded, one boot missing. He limped toward a shallow ditch but fell halfway. Didn't move again. The pilot was circling back. Stiegler heard it, a low rumble, constant, hungry. There was no panic in its rhythm, no rush, no confusion. This was not desperation, it was execution. Another pass, the last one. He watched it come, nose down, guns flashing. A storm condensed into one man, one machine, one purpose. It didn't fire this time. Not yet. It flew low, so low Stiegler could see the pilot's helmet. See the painted teeth on the engine cowling. See the American flag under the wing. Then the guns lit again. And the rest of Battery 3 vanished in smoke and thunder. The plane climbed at last, vanishing over the hedgerows like a shadow retreating into light. Silence fell. Real silence. No radios, no orders, no breathing. Stiegler sat up slowly, blinking through soot. His battery, what was left of it, burned quietly behind him. He looked at the scorched earth, the smoldering metal. The body of a man who had, just this morning, handed him coffee. They had dug deep, camouflaged perfectly, calculated everything. But none of that mattered, because one man, one American, had broken the pattern, and nothing in their doctrine had prepared them for that. Smoke curled upward in lazy spirals, drifting toward a sky now clear and calm. Stiegler sat in the crater that once housed his command post. He held a bent pair of range-finding binoculars in his lap, lenses cracked, smeared with ash. His fingers trembled, but not from pain. He wasn't wounded, not physically. Around him, the remnants of the battery smoldered. One gun wheel spun slowly in the breeze, creaking like an old door. Ammunition cases burst sporadically in the heat, each pop a reminder of how fast it had all ended. He tried to speak, to issue a report, to call for help, but his throat was dry. Mud clung to his face like war paint. Across the field, he saw Bremer, face down, still. No one moved to check him. There was no one left to move. Stiegler stood, legs shaky, and turned slowly, as if waking from a dream. The hedgerows, once their fortress, now looked like prison walls. The very camouflage they'd trusted had become their coffin. He picked his way through the wreckage, past splintered crates and shredded canvas. Near the edge of the orchard, he found the wreckage of Gretel. The gun's recoil system lay 10 feet away. 2 crewmen, what was left of them, lay beside the pit, faces burned beyond recognition. Stiegler knelt, not to pray, just to be closer. He whispered something. It wasn't German. It wasn't anything. Later, much later, he would write in his field notebook, "We trained to calculate, to measure wind, distance, fuse delay. We believed in geometry more than instinct. But that American, he didn't follow geometry. He followed instinct. Or madness. Or courage. I don't know anymore." Captured 2 days later, Stiegler said almost nothing to his interrogators. But when handed a mug of coffee, American, bitter, strong, he stared into it for a long time. Then he asked one question. "Do all your pilots fly like that?" The young American sergeant, puzzled, answered truthfully, "Only the crazy ones." Stiegler laughed, short, bitter, hollow. He laughed because he knew something then. Germany had trained men to follow rules. America had trained men to break them, for the right reasons. And that day, one man had flown beneath every rule, every map, every expectation. And he had erased an entire battery, with nothing more than timing, instinct, and boldness. The P-47 hadn't come from nowhere. It had come from a steel and canvas miracle that stretched across Normandy like an invisible web. From airstrips carved out of French fields, American ground crews worked in 12-hour shifts. Fuel trucks arrived hourly. Spare parts stacked in tents. Engines swapped in minutes. Wings replaced before the sun could set. Lieutenant Colonel Howard W. Brown had taken off at 0610. 3 fuel tanks strapped beneath his wings. A can of warm Coca-Cola beside his throttle. His orders were clear. Patrol altitude. Engage armor only when spotted in clusters. But Brown didn't follow altitude that day. Flying nap of the earth wasn't standard. It was dangerous, unauthorized. But he'd heard about the artillery hiding in the hedgerows. He had made a choice. And behind him, the system had his back. Fuel was never a concern. In 2 weeks, the 9th Air Force had delivered over 2 million gallons to forward airfields. Tanker trucks, bladders, pipelines laid by engineers who'd never fired a shot, but made every shot possible. Even Coca-Cola had shipped bottling equipment to France. Brown's squadron drank soda between missions, played cards under camouflage netting, and returned to the sky with their engines full. They weren't just supplied. They were fed, maintained, rotated, rested, and, most importantly, trusted. If a pilot disobeyed orders but returned with results, the paperwork could wait. Because the system wasn't built on fear, It was built on flexibility. Stiegler's destroyed battery wasn't the first struck by a rogue pilot. And it wouldn't be the last, because the Americans had built something the Germans never expected: an army that ran on improvisation, a war machine with fuel lines instead of chain of command wires. And every time a thunderbolt dove low, it carried not just bullets, but the full weight of an industrial empire behind it. In Germany, deviation meant punishment. In America, it meant potential. Stiegler remembered how his own commander once slapped a corporal for adjusting a firing table without permission. Even if the correction was right, it wasn't authorized. Discipline first. Results second. But that thunderbolt? That pilot? He hadn't waited for clearance. He hadn't followed the firing arc. He'd seen a moment and taken it. Back in the ruins of Battery 3, Stiegler's surviving gun crews whispered rumors. That was no recon. No, that was personal. Ace, maybe, or drunk. But they all said one thing: he was allowed to do it. They didn't understand. Behind that single pilot wasn't chaos. It was design. American industry had reshaped war like an assembly line. Planes like the P-47 were built in modular chunks. Wings could be swapped in an hour. Landing gear pulled and replaced like light bulbs. Engines changed mid-morning, rearmed by noon, airborne by sunset. Every plane had twin versions waiting in crates. Every broken fuselage had 3 sets of parts within reach. Even the pilots were trained that way. Standardized, interchangeable, sharp, but never robotic. Command taught them to think, not obey, to improvise when the field changed. Brown had learned it back in Texas. You survive by instinct. You win by timing. The Germans had laughed at such slogans. Now Stiegler understood. This was not a war of maps. It was a war of flow, of who could bend, shift, adapt fastest. And for all their doctrines and drills, the Germans had built a rigid machine in a world that now rewarded chaos. Brown returned to base that night. His wingman said nothing, just raised a can of Coke and smirked. A clerk filed the report under "Deviated from order. Successful engagement." 3 words scribbled next to it in grease pencil: effective, repeatable, encouraged. By the end of July 1944, St. Lo was rubble. The Germans had called it the gateway to hell. The Americans called it the hinge. Operation Cobra had begun, and the skies belonged to thunder. In 5 days, over 11,000 American sorties blanketed the region. Some flew at 15,000 feet. Others, like Brown, scraped the earth. Of the German artillery units stationed west of St. Lo, nearly 60% were destroyed or abandoned before they fired their second salvo. The Luftwaffe had all but vanished. Fuel shortages, pilot losses, factory bombings. Meanwhile, the U.S. 9th Air Force was growing. Each P-47 sortie consumed over 265 gallons of aviation fuel. Multiply that by 1-200 flights per day, and the math becomes staggering. Stiegler did the numbers, later, as a prisoner, staring at captured reports. They had burned over 2 million gallons in 10 days just to keep planes like Brown's in the air. 2 million gallons for one sector, 1 week, 1 push. He scribbled into the margins of his journal. We thought we were ready for a war of men. They brought a war of machines. We counted rounds. They counted factories. The average American factory worker, working just 1 hour, produced more war material than a German soldier could destroy in a week. Tanks, planes, bullets, boots, all shipped, all standardized. all fueled by a system that didn't blink when pilots broke the rules, because the system was built for speed, not perfection. Brown's attack had cost fuel, a few hundred rounds, a refueling truck, maybe a wing replacement. Stiegler's position had cost him 4 88mm guns, 39 men, 2 months of logistics, a sector's worth of firepower, and his belief that planning alone could win a war. In one report, a German general wrote, "They spent gasoline like it was water. We spent lives like coins." And perhaps the most chilling line, scribbled in a post-action memo by a captured German officer. "They burned 1,000 gallons to stop one gun, and we couldn't stop them from doing it again." Stiegler sat with that number, 1,000 gallons. 1,000 gallons to erase everything he built. Years later, in a Texas aviation museum, Stiegler stood beneath a Republic P-47. It was painted fresh, polished to gleaming metal, but the teeth on the engine cowling were the same. The same as the ones that had appeared over the hedgerows, just before everything turned to fire. He was older now, hair white, knees stiff, but he hadn't forgotten. A boy walked past, no older than 12. He stopped, looked up at the thunderbolt, and tugged at his father's sleeve. "Was it loud?" Stiegler heard the question. He turned. "Louder than anything," he said, voice soft. The boy blinked. "Did it win the war?" Stiegler looked up again, not at the plane, but at the space around it. The silence it now occupied. The memory it still carried. "No," he said. "It wasn't the noise that won it." He paused. "It was that it shouldn't have been there, and yet it was." The father thanked him, not understanding. They walked on. Stiegler remained. He raised his eyes one last time. And for a brief moment, in the museum's stillness, he thought he heard it again. That impossible sound. That low, ripping engine. That one pilot who broke through everything they believed, because the sky doesn't forget, and neither did he.